back to Ask Steve Judd. My name is Sue Brayne, and today Steve and I are going to be talking about relationships, but not just the seventh house relationships. And in the chart, as Steve will explain, they indicate the kind of relationships that we might want, or perhaps the needs that we are projecting onto our partners. So, Steve, first question is, okay to start with the seventh house and just to give a broad understanding of how it works in our charts, and then we might launch into other things to do with relationships.
A lot of people think that the seventh house is all about partners and personal and intimate relationships. And of course it is, but that's not all it does. The seventh house governs all of your one-to-one relationships. So I know that things like mother and father will come under the 4th and 10th house, and children come under the 5th house, and relationships with friends and community will be 11th, and neighbors and siblings will come under the 3rd. But there's an attachment of all of them to the 7th because it's one-to-one, and that can be personal and intimate, but it can also be friend, social, professional. Any one-to-one relationship is ruled by the 7th house. So there is it's not a standard, but it's a good guide that the sign on the cusp of your 7th house is seen generally as indicative of the sign of a zodiac that you generally get on with very well. It's not always the case, but it is more often than not. So, for example, I've got Virgo rising, so I've got Pisces on my 7th house. So theoretically, I should get on with Pisces better than most other signs. And to a generalized extent, that's true. So
do you feel like in the relationship area that when you're with a Pisces, do you feel like there's a sense of camaraderie because you are in opposite signs?
I wouldn't use the word camaraderie, Sue. I'd use the word ease of flow.
Ease of flow. That's nice.
It's just easy to get on with them. It's natural.
Yes. Yes.
You know, if you're Gemini rising, you're going to get on well with Sagittarians. If you're Aquarius rising, you'll get on well with Leos.
Yes, except in my experience.
Yeah, I know. I
Oh,
know.
that's a bit dodgy sometimes.
It's a
As an
generalization.
Aquarian.
It is a generalization.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I found really interesting is often when, especially in Chiron's in the 7th, there is this sense of perhaps wounding around relationship. But in my experience, a lot of people who have that end up as therapists doing one-to-one
Yes.
with couples.
A lot of people with Chiron in the 7th house, in the first 30 or 40 or sometimes 50 years of life, they tend to actually put themselves down and think, oh, I'm just not good relationship material. I'm crap at relationships. I don't deserve to be in relationship. As a result, they do so much work on themselves that they end up becoming a relationship therapist or psychologist or something like that. And then once they've helped others heal themselves in their relationship patterns, it's almost like once they've done their duty to others, the Chiron in the 7th house person will then give themselves permission to become good relationship material. But it takes 50 years.
Yeah, and it's trust, isn't it? It's Chiron is in the 7th. It's, can I trust this person?
And then there's Saturn in the 7th.
Oh, I have to share this with you. I had a wonderful client just a couple of days ago, Saturn in the 7th in Gemini, and she has a long-term relationship with somebody 15 years younger than her.
Saturn in the 7th house, it is much more common than any other position for these people to form relationships with other individuals who are 7 or 14-15 years older or younger than them, because that's the Saturn cycle. And it's not what you might expect. It's not like the mummy, daddy, little boy, little girl thing. That's completely different. For some reason, Saturn in the seventh, you're naturally drawn. When you're younger, you go for older people. And when you're older, you go for younger people. And
Yes.
yeah, it's weird.
Interesting, isn't it?
But I think Saturn in the seventh house is probably the best position in the sky for it. And I'm sure that everyone listening under the age of 30 or 35 with Saturn in the seventh house is going to be going, you're crazy. It's a real limiter and restrictor and inhibitor, and I can't find good relationships. To which, so I see so many people with Saturn in the seventh, younger people under 36, coming to me going, oh, if only I was in a good relationship, everything else would be all right. To which the obvious answer is you can't be in a good relationship with anyone else till you're first of all in a good relationship with
With
yourself.
yourself. I think also for Saturn in the seventh is that you tend to find, as you say, relationships, steady, reliable relationships later on in life. And I think Saturn brings that sort of, can bring that. I know it teaches you hard stuff, but it brings that stability. And we need that Saturn energy, don't we, to have a stable, long-term relationship.
Indeed. So I quite like Saturn in the seventh, and I like most of the difficult planets in the seventh house. The so-called easy planets in the seventh house, I'm not so fond of. I know this sounds strange because I'm talking about 1 in 12 of people, but someone with the sun or the moon, or sometimes even Venus in the seventh house, there is a small, not risk, but chance of them being consumed or subsumed by the relationship and then seeing the world through the partner's eyes. It's almost as if they live life through their partner.
Or would you say they're looking for, sun is looking in seventh, the sun's looking for dad, or you know, the person is projecting that desire for a father figure, or the moon is the mother figure. Would you say that?
In this day and age, I wouldn't say mother or father. I'd say male or female role model imagery.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because of a
Yeah,
gender
sure.
variation we've got today.
Yeah.
But yes, something like that. Yes. When you get someone with a lot of planets in the seventh house, it can be very difficult because they have trouble separating themselves in terms of identity and individuality from their relationships.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. I think for me, when I started to understand relationships and stop projecting my unmet needs of myself onto everybody else, thinking everybody else is going to fix me, I think I suddenly began to understand that the most important relationship with me was actually my relationship with myself. But also for me, on my spiritual journey, it was with the divine, the big L.
Yeah.
When I got that, relationships became much easier for me.
For me, I had to reach the point where I said, okay, I'm done with relationships. I'm now okay on my own and I'm quite happy. Thank you very much on my own. I no longer need or even necessarily want to be in relationships. I'm good on my own. At which point I met my soulmate.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know,
That often happens, doesn't it?
that's the way it can happen.
I'm
So
just thinking, oh, sorry, I'm just thinking about relationships. People often associate love relationships with sex.
yeah.
And I think that's another thing that I'd like to ask you about particularly about the chart, and because a lot of relationships are not about sex. It's
No.
a loving heart opening relationship. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
In early January this year, the English newspaper, the British newspaper, The Times, ran a collection of the best letters from the last year, and one of them was talking about relationships. It was an older lady living in Torquay saying, "I'm in my late 70s. I have a great life. I have everything I want. I have wonderful sex life. Except the only thing that would make it better is if I had someone to share it with." And I cracked up with that.
That's after her.
Yes, brilliant. When older, obviously the sex drive, it doesn't decrease, it becomes more refined and sophisticated.
Yes, it does.
When younger, it's more about the cut and thrust,
But also
and
to
obviously
make
the
up to
propagation of the
propagate.
race.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, I don't really associate sex with the seventh house. Obviously, it's connected with relationships, but it's sexuality is just one side of a coin. Because okay, let's look at the rather than the seventh house, look at the seventh sign, Libra, and its opposite, the first sign, Aries, ruled by Venus and Mars. I was
Yeah.
doing this in my teaching last night with my student database, and it's all about how Venus is about sensuality and it's the exotic and the sensual, whereas Mars is the erotic and the sexual. Venus is what you want, Mars is how you get it. And you can't look at the seventh house of relationship without also looking at the first house of the relationship you have with yourself. They are equal and opposite. So that's why when you're looking at in a good relationship, the partner has to reflect yourself in some shape or form.
Yeah.
And are certain comparisons that work very well, and there's certain comparisons that never work. For example,
Mm.
if person A's moon is very strongly opposite person B's Pluto,
Oh,
that's
yes.
not going to work.
That's not
But
good.
no matter how pure they are of
Yeah.
mind, there's always going to be a lot of deep undertones, and it's going to involve a little bit of manipulative, and it's not necessarily deliberate. It can just spring up.
Unconscious, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, there's a
but
power, there is a power thing or obsessional
yeah.
thing going on. Pluto, that's so great that you brought Pluto up, because that's the kind, that's, I think that's what we all need. The Pluto energy is what we need to really address in our own psyche before we can actually understand our relationship with ourselves and with others. And here's your Pluto book.
The law of Pluto,
Absolutely. The love,
exploring the void, reshaping the void.
absolutely.
I wrote that when Pluto was opposite my sun for a year, and I was dealing with a lot of
Wow.
pain.
Yes. So do you
So
want to say a little bit more about Pluto's role in how it can play out in our life in relationships?
if Pluto in your chart is very strong, you're not going to settle for superficial, lightweight relationships, and you need a partner who's at least as psychologically attuned as yourself.
Mm.
And if the synastry with Pluto isn't always bad. If Pluto is, for example, sextiling the partner's Mars or trining the partner's Sun or Venus, then that's going to add a real quality of a depth and passion and intensity, but in a positive way. It's going to keep the relationship fresh and alive. And
Mhm.
Pluto does deal with one's basic, most primal urges. So if
Yeah,
there's strong, healthy contacts with Pluto, there's a good chance that the sensuality and the sexuality will continue with power right
yeah.
the way through to the end of one's life.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that's so true. So what about when Pluto is square? And we've talked about the opposition of the moon, but or square the sun, or square the moon, or maybe square or opposite Venus. That can be a bit, and Mars, that can be a bit dodgy, can't it?
We could spend a whole workshop just on those
Mm.
aspects. Basically, if one person's Pluto is opposite or square the other person's personal planets, with the possible exception of Mercury, it's just not going to work.
It
I
might
mean,
take a really
nine
long,
times out of 10, it's not going to work.
yeah,
I'm sorry, but that's the way it is.
yeah.
Whereas you get, when you get two people with the moon in the same sign, or someone's moon, person A's moon on person B's sun, then I have pleasure saying to these people, right, well, you might as well get married because you're stuck with each other. You're never going to find anyone better.
Yes,
And they
yes.
both go, that's fine. I'm comfortable with him or her. You
It's,
know,
and the word is comfortable, isn't it? It
yeah,
really is. When their moons are in sync, it's such a comfortable where the moon isn't in sync. They don't quite meet
they
emotionally. There's
jar.
something off.
But when you've got the moon in the same sign, you can dance around each other in the kitchen.
Yes,
You know
yes.
when each other's going to say something. You know when each other wants a bit of quiet or silence. there's an ease of flow around the relationship. It's just synchronous, synergetic, and easy.
And maybe when they are in sync, they are soulmates, because, you know, the moon is the soul. It's possible that they really do attract that.
It's also that they boost each other's company. They boost each other's energy when the moon is in the same sign.
Yes. Yeah.
There's
Or
other
trying.
similarities. I mean, when you've got Venus in the same sign or conjunct, then the persons are going to have similar tastes in things like music or food. When Mars is a conjunct and it's an appropriate age gap, then there's going to be a very strong physical side to the relationship for the long term. And it will be a bit like cat and dog, but and they will fight, but when it's over, it's over.
Yes, and
You know,
it's that kind of it's that story, isn't it? Of, you know, fight, 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 that, and then you make it up.
yeah. Throw
In
a
the
few plates in the
boudoir.
kitchen, throw a few plates in the kitchen, and then retreat to the bedroom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
a lot of people survive really well in their relationship, and they kind of feed off that.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
But I think the thing about Pluto for me, I'm always a little bit wary, because there is this power dynamic that plays out around Pluto, isn't there?
yes, yes. Pluto can be an incredible force for self-empowerment, psychological self-awareness, transformation, and rebirth. But in order for that to happen, one has to be comfortable with one's own psychology.
Yeah,
And that means dealing with your dark side
yeah, yes,
and
yeah.
not getting rid of it, suppressing it, or repressing it, but giving it a little dungeon at the core of your being where it can fester away to its heart's content, and even under carefully controlled circumstances come out to play so it feels part of the team.
Well, are we talking here about dominatrix, that kind of deep, that's
Mhm.
Pluto in sort of down in the dungeons, and I just,
Yeah.
or that kind of, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that if you're consenting adults, absolutely, but I think Pluto can bring out, or a sense of wanting to dominate somebody else.
Yes,
That's
and
really
the opposite
interesting.
side of this, of course, is if there's an overly powerful Neptune, then the person can go, "Oh, I just love being dominated." So it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah, yes,
if there's nothing wrong with this, as you say, as long
yeah,
as it is consensual and there are clear boundaries.
yes. I think the other thing for me with Neptune, I don't know where you are with this, but there's, if Neptune's very strong around relationships, there can be a tendency to idealize somebody.
Absolutely, you put people on pedestals, and you see them as the perfect partner, and you put them on a pedestal and you adore them, which is always a bad mistake because inevitably they come crashing down, and then you feel disappointed or rejected or abandoned.
Yes. Or
So
deceived. I think
yes, or
potentially
deceived. Yes, you
deceived.
promised to be this good and you're actually not. But you're actually kidding yourself by
Yes.
doing that. It's you can't blame the other person for not being as good as you want them to be.
No, but I think it's really interesting when when you first meet somebody and it's just like, bang, oh my God, they're my soulmate. Oh, and there is this sense of complete overwhelmed, this is it, this is the one.
Yeah.
And you're both on the pedestal with each other. And then one of you starts falling, and then the other one starts falling, and then
Oh, I didn't notice that wart. Yeah.
yes. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about that, sort of, the
Um,
difference
it's
between,
the difference between being in love, which is absolutely amazing, and
yeah,
falling in love, which
yes,
isn't. Because when
yes,
you fall in love, you become seduced or enchanted, not by the other person, but with the idea of being in love. It's almost like you get consumed or absorbed by it,
yes.
and that inevitably leads to disappointment.
Do you think it's because we meet personality first, and personality is, oh, I like you, and then actually behind the personality is the sun sign, and behind that is the moon sign, and we don't actually properly meet the sun or the moon, because the personality is in front of that, and when we get to know, and then other parts of our personality start walking up and presenting themselves in relationship.
They're in the majority of people, when younger, like under 30, 35, the first thing you always spot is, okay, oh, that's nice. Oh, I wonder where their
Fancy
Venus and Mars is, right? As opposed to where's your moon or where's your Saturn? Um, I let's just take a step back to Saturn. Most astrologers will go, oh, well, his Saturn's on top of her Venus, or her Saturn is squaring his sun. That's not going to work. But I would go, wait a minute. Depending on their age and their maturity, it can be the best possible aspect because Saturn is the planet of longevity. And any contacts with Saturn, if once you've been in the relationship 7 years, well, it's probably going to last forever. Because I I
Yes.
don't mind Saturn contacts in relationships as
Even
long as it's
square, Steve. Even
uh, as-
even if it's a square, you can have
even then in most cases. Now there are certain configurations with Saturn that are difficult, like Saturn conjunct opposite or square someone's Mars, for example.
yes,
That
yes,
can that can trigger issues around anger management for both people. So that's something to be wary of. But I don't mind Saturn in aspect to the Sun or Venus because yes, it brings a cautionary note, but it also brings prudence and structure and boundary, which over a period of time is very good for most relationships.
yeah.
So, but it's
And
not only
lessons, isn't it? It's learning. Relationships are about learning. You learn through each other. You learn through your how you relate, how you listen to each other, how you communicate with each other.
indeed, indeed, and there you have to bring in also the other two air houses, the third and the 11th. The third for the media and the communication and the networking at the one-to-one level, because there you've got the relationships you have with siblings and cousins and neighbors and people who you're not emotionally involved with, but nevertheless have a strong relationship with.
Mm.
And the 11th house, because after all, it's to do with community, tribe, and friend, and one's long-term goals and ambitions for the future. So when you see the relationships, when you see someone with a lot of planets in the 11th house, then they're going to be less worried about personal and intimate relationships and more concerned around their interaction in and with the group, the tribe, the community. And yes, anything personal that comes out of that is a bonus, but that's not the reason for being there. There's this sense of wanting to be part of a bigger whole than just an individual.
Yeah,
So
yes,
that's not to subsume one's sense of identity,
mm.
but it's to be part of a community, yes.
Yes. And that's how we survive and thrive, isn't it? Within the context of community and having relationship. Okay, Steve, big question. Do you think a chart can tell someone that they actually relationships are not for them this time?
Very, very rarely, 1 in 1,000 or even fewer. But you're doing a chart and you realize, oh, okay, this person's got Uranus on the 7th house cusp, right? And at that point, I just have to say to them, look, you are just not cut out for 2.2 kids, mortgage car, job. It's just never going to happen. And if it did, you'd be bored. So forget it. It's not going to happen like that. But then the other side of the same coin is they can still have good long-term relationships as long as there's a degree of autonomy
Yes.
within the freedom within the confines of a committed relationship,
Mm.
where you don't check up on each other and you just trust each other.
Oh, you
So,
don't live together.
or you don't necessarily live together.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of the best relationships I know are people who live next door to each other or 100 yards down the street. And then they've got their own space and independence, but also their
Yes.
partner is close by. And that's just as good. And in this day and age, as good, if not even better in some cases.
Well, it takes the intensity out, the expectations and intensity out of it, doesn't it, of living together? Living together is full on.
It can be, yes.
Yeah.
It's the trade-off between the need for someone to nurture and be nurtured by, someone to care for or be cared for by, versus the need for one's individuality and personal freedom. So
Yeah.
it's a trade-off, and there's no one way that's better or worse than the other. It's up to the individuals concerned.
Yeah. Would you say then, if you're talking about Uranus on the descendant, would you also say that if Aquarius was on the cusp of the seventh, this person needs freedom within relationships?
If they've got Aquarius on the seventh house cusp, they've got Leo rising,
Yeah, they have.
and Leo rising, they often see their partners as a mirror for themselves when younger. Again, I hate to sound like, excuse me, I'm going to be a bit crude here. I hate to sound like a boring old fart, right? But I have got this thing. I was talking to my students last night about this, about age. Most challenging aspects, maybe Pluto accepted, but most challenging aspects, once you're halfway through life, 42 onwards, you tend to be able to knock the rough edges off and smooth them around and adapt and
Yeah.
compromise.
Yes. Compromise. It's a great word.
Oh, it really is. It really is. Meeting people halfway so that no one gains, but no one loses, but without getting boring.
Yeah. Or giving yourself away.
Yes, no surrender.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
over compromising and everybody, I need to take care of everybody else and I don't mind. I mean, that's such a Libra thing, isn't it? In the seventh on the
And,
cusp.
and a Neptunian thing.
And a
I'll,
net.
I'll suffer so that you can benefit, but I'm not going to
Yes.
complain about it, honest.
Yes. Much.
Much.
Quietly in the corner, chuntering
Where's
away.
my whiskey? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I'll just drink myself to death instead. Absolutely.
And then you'll all be sorry.
It's so interesting, isn't it?
Oh, it's fascinating. So
So just to finish off, Pluto in the seventh. What would you say to somebody who has Pluto in the seventh? I'm always slightly wary of Pluto in the seventh.
don't do lightweight relationships.
No.
Don't want as and there is a fundamental rule with Pluto in the seventh. There's no point in getting into a relationship with anyone at any type, whether it's personal, financial, professional, social. There's no point of, if you've got Pluto in the seventh, of getting into any relationship unless you're going to be absolutely honest with them about everything,
Yeah.
and unless everyone else is absolutely honest with you. Because once you find out that you're not being dealt with honestly, the sense of betrayal is so big that the trust just goes forever.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And so it's all or nothing with Pluto in the seventh.
Yes. It's
You
a
know,
hard one, that one, isn't it? Because
yes, it is.
hence loyalty and wanting the truth, and it is this, and this, it's again, it's very powerful, but it's
But
so the crisis can be huge, as you say, like,
yes. And the risk of that, of course, is okay, so we've got this fundamental honesty with each other. We absolutely trust each other. Right, it's us against the world. That's the other risk of Pluto in the seventh.
which can be
But
obsessional, can't it?
yes,
Yeah.
but the positive side of Pluto in the seventh, because it's always a positive, is that it can lead to such a degree of profoundness where you feel so enriched by being with your partner, knowing that it's two-way traffic, that you both just flower and grow exponentially, not linearly, but exponentially. And then other people will recognize that and they will want to be around you both because it rubs off on them.
Yes.
So there's a kind of unconscious transformational wave that spreads out from people with Pluto in the seventh into the world when it's done properly.
Yeah. And that's the learning, isn't it? That's the learning of
There's always a positive side as well as a
yeah.
challenge.
Oh, Steve, this has been so interesting.
Yeah, it's been a really good one.
Love
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much more to say and to explore, but we're running out
Time.
of time. So is there anything else you'd just like to finish off by saying to everyone?
One planet, 8 billion different worlds. We're all responsible for our own perception. And if you want to build good relationships with anyone else in the outside world, regardless of who they are or what type of relationship it is, the first golden rule is work on the relationship with yourself.
Completely agree with that. That's the essential.